Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me to contribute today. It's a little disjointed here, but we'll get going.
Yeah,
I'm going to present really quickly 2 seasons of data from the trial designed to evaluate the impact of biochar as a soil amendment on wine grape growth, water use, grape yields, and fruit quality. As part of the California Department of Water Resources efforts to increase agricultural water use efficiency throughout California, they funded research by the Sonoma Ecology Center and its subcontractor, the University of California, Riverside, on the effects on crop water usage of adding biochar and compost to soils. Monterey Pacific decided to host a trial at our Oasis Vineyard in South Monterey County. That's the old San Bernardino vineyards, the largest contiguous vineyards in the United States. The best time to impact vineyard or other perennial crop soils with organic matter additions is at planting, because you can put the amendments directly below where you're planting. So this is the way we did it. We used a first pass of a GPS controlled deep winged ripper. And there's the ripper right there, followed by compost applied within the delve left by that first pass of the ripper, compost or biochar. And then the last pass of the ripper, second pass, mixes that amendment with the soil directly below where we're going to be planting. So here you see, basically, this is the area where the compost has been mixed in. This is the area shattered out by the V-winged ripper. This is not the soil where we had the trial. This is a different, very hard soil. But this shows you the mixing area beneath the vine row from the incorporation of amendments. The soil type is mostly oceano sand with an organic matter content of 0.7%, which is low. Trial amendment treatments included a control with no compost, no biochar, compost with 15 tons of compost, a biochar treatment with 10 tons of biochar, and a biochar and compost treatment with 15 tons of compost and 10 tons of biochar, each replicated 4 times. You can see down here, that's the actual compost biochar mix in the actual trial being applied down the V after the first pass of the ripper. It's a lot of material, and incorporating that, basically just the 10 tons of biochar per acre calculated out to be about 1% by weight of biochar, or about 0.4% increase in soil organic matter by doing that incorporation. Ground was prepped in late 2016 and the block planted in March 2017. The vines are Pinot Noir, clone 456 on 1103, planted at 9 by 5 spacing on high wired box prune trellis, which is a high production system. We installed watermark soil moisture sensors in each of the 16 sub blocks at 18 inches and 30 inches depth, with the data recorded on 4 watermark data loggers. It seemed like we buried miles of cables 3 feet deep to get this thing set up so we could measure water, soil water. We're also using a new technology that evaluated the treatments using aerial imagery provided by VineView. Their PureVine EVI uses, basically it's enhanced vegetation index that's less sensitive to atmospheric conditions, shadowing, and soil variations than an NDVI, which most people are familiar with. But basically we're able to compare block to block, season to season, because it's all calibrated imagery. Very nifty stuff. This is basically what you get, is a vine by vine analysis with the EVI and the canopy area for each vine. You can see here this arrow pointed to that vine shows that vine has a canopy area of 9.939 meters squared and an EVI of 653. Basically the scale goes from dark red low vigor to green high vigor. Each vine has its vigor represented by the colored circle. So missing vines like these white block dots are easily stand out, and you can really see how the vigor is spread through the block. The variability in the trial area was pretty high. On the right, you see the vigor zones as mapped out. Those are the 16 sub-blocks included, the treatments. On the left is the individual vines kind of showing how the vigor is distributed. So this is what you get in the imagery is, this is all 16 of the sub-blocks analyzed together to give a mean EVI of 0.404, standard deviation of 0.504, and the distribution of plants within each vigor level. So this is all the blocks combined, the 16. Here's the control, and you can see from the average, it's shifted to the left considerably. The EVI has dropped to 0.389. And here is the top part of my screen's cut off, so I can't see. I believe this is the biochar treatment, yes. And here is the compost treatment. And no, sorry, I can't see the top of my screen because of that. There's all treatments. There's the control. There's biochar. There's compost. And there's compost plus biochar. You see is that the curve shifts to the right, indicating more vigor. And the pruning weights that we did following that imagery in January 2020 follow the same hierarchy, basically control, biochar, compost, compost plus biochar. Although the differences weren't significant because there was so much noise in the pruning weight data. And that's the beauty of using the imagery. You're actually evaluating every single vine to get the differences. In the first year of production, only the biochar treatment gave significantly better yields than the control, with 1.3 tons per acre increase. The fourth leaf, which was this season, harvested about 2 weeks ago, gave even more encouraging yield results, with all the amendments significantly beating the control. The biochar only treatment increased yield as it did in 2019 by a little over a ton per acre. But the compost only increased yields by 1.8 tons per acre, and the compost plus biochar by 2 tons per acre. There were basically no differences in cluster size or cluster weight in either harvest, but cluster numbers did differ and accounted for the yield differences. The biochar treatment had the highest number of clusters in 2019, and the compost biochar mix had the most clusters in 2020. More clusters look to be the result of larger, more vigorous vines, especially in this year in 2020. Excuse me, DWR was looking for water savings, and we did see increased water use efficiency, more crop produced for the same amount of applied water in some treatments. All blocks received the same irrigation regime based on ET measurement, evapotranspiration measurements, and the blocks that had drier soils were also those that produced more crop. Bigger vines with more grapes and more leaves had greater transpiration and more water taken from the soil. So you can see at both depths, the compost plus biochar and the compost alone treatments, especially during periods of high water use, dried the soil out considerably more. This is still water potential, so the higher the number, the drier the soil. The biochar and control treatments were very similar at both depths, regardless of the time. So biochar didn't produce more yield, but didn't use more water. Interesting. Finally, we wanted to be sure we had no negative impacts from biochar on fruit quality. So we analyzed berry samples from every sub-block so we could calculate the statistical differences between them. The samples were tested at a commercial lab, ETS, from the full phenolic panel plus Brix and acidity. So in the following tables, look at the percent difference column, so you can follow along because I'm speeding along to keep this under 10 minutes. So Brix in the biochar only blocks was a bit above control, but not by much. I think it's at least safe to say that there was little effect of biochar on Brix and pH. So in 2020, as I said, the cluster weights were similar in all treatments with little variation. However, berry weights, berry volume, and sugar per berry were all highest in the biochar treatment, significantly so for berry volume and sugar per berry. Now, larger berries sometimes mean less color and reduced quality, but the biochar treatment stands out as the highest in terms of color, anthocyanins and tannins, though the differences are not statistically different. Many more quality components were measured, but showed only small differences between treatments. All treatments neared 24 Brix, 24 sugar at the same time. So again, it's safe to say in this instance that biochar did not negatively affect grape quality or time to harvest. There were in fact some hints that grape quality may have been improved. Quick economics of the trial, the biochar cost for 10 tons per acre was $2,000. The yield increase was 1.3 tons, And a great price of $2,000 per ton represents an additional revenue of $2,600 in that first year of production, year 3 of the vines in the ground. So for harvest this season, the biochar treatment again yielded over a ton more per acre than control, giving additional income of about $2,600 for the first 2 years of production. If you assume small increases over the following years, you're definitely way ahead by putting biochar in the ground. Plus you have all that carbon sequestration. The most promising treatment in these low organic matter soils is the compost biochar mix. It's apparently a potent mix for vine growth and yields. The compost for shorter term organic matter boost, and biochar for long-term organic matter maintenance and carbon sequestration. It's become clear in the recent literature that composting biochar together with the compost substrates gives a mix that's much like a supercharged compost. In our case, the mixed biochar and compost matured together in a windrow like this one over 2 months before applying in the winter. So the economics are even more attractive with this mix, with an average yield increase of 2 tons per acre over the control in the first year of production. That's 4,000 per acre at current prices. Increased profit per year at current grape prices is pretty good stimulus to do this thing. That's it.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Very interesting indeed. I think a lot of vineyard owners are going to be very interested to hear that. We are changing this up a bit, and we're actually doing the farmer portion of it right here now, just 3 short presentations, and then we can get to some questions afterwards. So Amit, if you want to go ahead and do that, and then we'll do Quatermoc last.
I hope you can see my presentation, yeah?
Yep.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to the organizer for this opportunity. I wear 2 hats. I'm a professor at Washington State University, and I'm a recent convert to or a believer in biochar. And let me just walk you through that. A few years ago, when I heard about biochar, and in our circles, there was a lot of discussion about that it has some potential benefits to soil. And I know I speak to the choir over here, so pardon me for my ignorance. But anyways, I was a bit skeptical about all the claims that were being made. And one of my contacts finally said, well, you're a scientist. Why don't you test it out for yourself? And of course, the first thing we want to look at is if we can get a consistent source of biochar. And so my presentation here is kind of split into 2. I will first present some of the trials that have been done which have been farmed out and done by the company called Carbon Logic, where now I serve as a chief science officer after becoming a believer of what I saw in my WSU lab. And then later on, I'll share some of the results from our lab and where we are taking this forward, and just learning from the fields of fertilizer or other biostimulants, how those industries have been able to do some methodical testing, science, to make it mainstream. So that's kind of where I'm going with that, and I'm really thankful for this invitation to speak today. I want to acknowledge the conflict of interest. I'm a consultant chief science officer for Carbon Logic, so it's a biochar manufacturing company. So as I mentioned earlier, my first education with working with Carbon Logic folks was that they were able to produce biochar from any feedstock. And I was quite surprised about that because when I reviewed a lot of papers, I often found that the details were sometimes missing. How was the biochar made? And there was obviously a lot of differences from batch to batch. Sometimes a lot of publications did not have all that information. What were the conditions? What was the dwell time, and etc. So the biggest thing for me was that, okay, this is a platform which can transform any kind of biomass into a consistent quality biochar. And actually, for all of the research that is done by Carbon Logic, as well as when we get the biochar from them to do any research at my lab, we always have these specific reports which are done by a commercial lab on quality, some of the physical and chemical properties, and also the organic content of the material as well. So I just wanted to share that some of the trial data that has come up in multiple crops, which is on the Carbon Logic side. Again, being a state employee, I don't work with cannabis, so disclaimer, this is data that has been provided to me, and I'm just passing it on. I have not worked directly with cannabis at all. But first of all, I wanted to discuss with you is the business approach they were taking is that they wanted to go into a market where there is higher ROI, both for the company and the consumer or the producer. So the focus has primarily been on some of the high value crops. And in the high value sector, organic farming, of course, everybody knows, does bring in higher returns. So there was an onion trial that was farmed out to Schreiber Farm. This is a farm located in the Tri-Cities area. It's a certified organic farm where they do field trials by contract. And what you're seeing here is basically one of those trials. It was done on one of the sweet onions. Our area over here is very famous for this these sweet onions. There were 5 replicates of 100 plants each. The application rate for the Carbon Logic product was approximately 400 gallons per acre. And as I mentioned, this is certified organic farm. So some of the summarized data from that is there are 2 different forms or 2 different size categories or classes of onions, 2.25 to 3 inch, which is the smaller size, and then the larger size over here. What you see here on the left is that they saw that there was about 9% increase in yield, but the number of onions also goes up. That's about 22% increase in the number of onions, plants per acre, basically. What is really significant is the change in the yield and the number of large-sized onions, in this case, with the addition of Carbon Logic. As you know that a lot of our produce, a lot of the onions, apples, they are basically separated by size classes. And based on that, you can get a premium pricing for that. So when you have approximately 400% increase in the numbers, as well as about a 80% increase in yield, that counts to real dollars, actually, especially in the organic market where the margins are already higher. So this is a independent trial done by Schreiber's Farm where they came back with. So next, I'm going to share some of the results that have been, or trials that have been performed directly by the cannabis producers. This is a short summary of multiple growers, both indoor and outdoor growers, where they will take the Carbon Logic product and add to their potting mix. So this is not real soil, which is, they're just fertilizing internally. So the way we speculate this is working it right now is it is changing the physical and chemical properties and also biological properties of the potting mix. Obviously, we just heard about water retention properties of biochar and the cation exchange capacity of biochar that can also help in better nutrient uptake. So what you see here is basically a percentage yield increases, as well as multiple growers. This is data reported by them. So sorry, it's not very, there's no standard errors over here. But anyway, so you can see that almost all of them have, except for 2 growers, there's approximately a 40% increase or above compared to the controls. This is relative data, basically. This includes multiple strains, indoor and outdoor, and with different grow media. These are all growers in the Washington state area. So just to kind of compare, of course, there is a response curve, how much biochar you're adding or Carbon Logic product you're adding to the mix. And this is the change in the dry weight, as you can see. You can see up to 65% increase with banana kush. This is an indoor grow operation. Similarly, in another product, Health Scan Cannabis, there were 2 different Carbon Logic products, a rapid starter and a high growth, which definitely has a positive correlation between the 2 different products, where up to 28% to 65% increase in yields were observed. So just the last example of this is that there is about 46% increase in one particular strain and then about 52% increase in another strain. One thing I think it's very clear that there is some level of interaction coming from the genetic background or the strain as well. So I was mentioning to you earlier, my skepticism also emerged from when I was reviewing a lot of the literature back in the day. And most of the publications, published reports, and I don't say all, but most, majority, would be using one type of biochar and one type of strain or cultivar and trying to really generalize how biochar is working. And I'll step into that a little bit later in this concept. So what does it really mean in terms of money back to the farmer? So this graph basically has on the y-axis you have the dollars and thousands, and then the self-reported returns of these farms that have basically, or these entities that have produced. So in blue, what you're seeing is the yearly revenue without the Carbon Logic product. In red, what you're seeing is the amount of Carbon Logic applied, what did it cost to the grower. And then at the top in green is the additional revenue that was derived from the addition of that much amount of money. As you can see that the ROI is, there's about 16x of the amount of money put in Carbon Logic that is returned. And of course, this raises the overall total revenue for these entities. So these are consistent products, and I think this is all being tracked very well because the market is continuing to utilize this Carbon Logic. And I believe one of my understandings from this is, or my conclusions is that the ability to produce a consistent quality product is the key to get such data every time. I would like to point out that there are cases where this does not happen, and that's because of sometimes folks use too much of cocoa fiber in their potting mix, and I think that's just reducing the density to a point where all the nutrients are leaching out, and in fact, the Carbon Logic is leaching out as well. So there is some sort of what type of potting mix you use is also key. In addition to these trials, Carbon Logic has been involved in multiple other trials. Field trials where in wheat they've seen about 15% yield improvement. In basil, they've done seen about 50% yield improvement. This is also in the Royal City, Yakima area. In potatoes, they've seen about 10 to 80%. Of course, it's variety dependent. I already mentioned to you that earlier. In grass seed, they've seen about 60% yield improvement. I think this graph on the right is very interesting as well. That has been done. So as you know, with over irrigation, utilization of land, there is a lot of aluminum toxicity that is coming in. So this is some data which has been done with Oregon State Universities. What they have observed is that with the use of biochar, you can actually reduce the aluminum toxicity and raise the pH from almost 4.93 back up to 5.73 in a span of 2 to 3 years. Why is it important? For two reasons. Aluminum toxicity, of course, is detrimental to plant growth, but it also fosters the growth of a pathogen that does not allow wheat production. But as you reclaim the soil, where you reduce soil acidification as well, you're able to reclaim those soils as well. So these are some ongoing projects in this area that are being conducted by Carbon Logic. If any of the folks are interested in that, please feel free to get in touch, and I'll put you in touch with the team, and they can coordinate with you to do any trials you might be interested in. I'm going to switch my hats now. I will speak about the trials, just take a few more slides to talk about the trials we did at Washington State University. So when I was introduced to the concept of biochar, as I mentioned earlier, most publications talked about that biochar is beneficial, or it is non-beneficial, or it is neutral, and all of them had an experimental design, which was one biochar without any details how it was produced, or there was not a lot of consistency, and then one cultivar. So our first experiment was to do a trial where we really wanted to see if there's a cross interaction between multiple types of biochar as well as different genetic background. So we used 3 cultivars of tomatoes. Heinz is a processing tomato, Oregon Spring is a backyard tomato, and Cobra is a greenhouse tomato. So you can see their genetics is very unique in itself. They're bred for different environments. Of course, there's an experimental flaw here because we're doing these trials, all of them in the greenhouse. But anyways, we were curious to see how the results will look like. We had 6 different types of biochar, including 1 commercial in addition to that. We had 2 different application rates. We use a sun-grow potting mix, and we had 4 technical replicates for this. So we'll jump into that. And of course, I speak to the choir again. Not all biochar is created equal. We did microscopy analysis to see there was a lot of variability in terms of the lattice structure of the cellulosic, lignocellulosic structures. And that would obviously, by inference, impact the physical property of water retention properties as well. So this is a summary which is rather interesting, which highlights the point I was trying to make earlier, that the same variety of tomato is responding differently to depending on what biochars you use. As you can see, up to a 26% increase in yield and about 2.93% increase in Brix is the calculation of the total sweetness, sugars in there. And this ryegrass straw is obviously a crop residue. So crop residue-based biochars are known to be higher in nitrogen, which is important for production. But as we learned earlier from Doug, he was looking at the berry quality. We could also see that there was an improvement in the quality of the produce, but also increase in yields. This is all being done, by the way, with organic fertilizer again. The mean yield improvement in one type of biochar also varied between different cultivars. So basically there's a cross interaction. So this was our first set of experiments demonstrating that there is a cross interaction between the type of biomass you use to produce biochar and the genetic background. There is an interaction between them. This publication is currently under review, actually. Then we continued our trials with the commercial product, which is the CarbonLogic. And in this, we have 2 different types. WFA is the CarbonLogic Plus, and WH is just the plain CarbonLogic. We definitely saw a major increase in yield in this particular case as well. And then the more important part was we used HPLC to measure citric acid content. So citric acid is the precursor for many flavorful compounds that really make you go after that same tomato over and over again. So this under the organic conditions, we could see a major increase in 200% increase in citric acid, as well as increase in glucose and fructose, which obviously makes the fruit taste sweeter. So these are some very good benefits. Of course, this was a greenhouse study. So we have just recently wrapped up a lettuce trial where we did the work with 3 different cultivars. Once again, 2 replicates. We had 3 different biochar application rates, 5, 10, and 20 tons. Now this is organic soil, which is already very high in organic content. And the benefits of biochar are really proposed to be more pronounced in marginal soil. So we really wanted to see what happens inside an organic soil. So this work was done at the WSU Agri Organic Farm. And in the first varietal, we saw about 74% increase in yields. In the second, it ranged from 56 to 86%. And in the other ones, about 39%. As you can see at the lower rate of 5 tons per acre, you can see a pronounced rate. So in a nutshell, this is fresh weight, of course. And with those type of yield improvements and weight improvements, the farmer can get a good return on their investment of utilizing the biochar. We've been kind of very curious on understanding what does biochar do. So we just published a very comprehensive review on this. And we know that biochar quality is impacted by various physical processing variations. You can change the characteristics. And also there are several proposed benefits of biochar. What we are really interested in finding out, going back to the idea of, how does fertilizer work? How does the biostimulants work? So our emphasis of research is to figure out how is this working? What is the mode of action biochar? And I think the most obvious answer is how is the presence of biochar changing the microbial dynamics inside the soil? I'll show you a couple of slides. This is the trial we've done at the Agri Farm where we took soil without biochar and soil with biochar at different time points, because we know that plants exude some metabolites that can foster different microbial communities. And so we've done a metatranscriptome study. What it basically means is we are able to see which microbes bacteria, fungi, viruses, other critters, which ones are really active, not just present, but which are actively working. And just as a very short summary, we know that when in the gray is the control, just the plant alone without any biochar, in the light green and the dark green are the samples, the changes in rhizosphere biodiversity of microbiome in the presence of the plants and the biochar. As you can see, the patterns are very different. And very interestingly, the rhizobium abundance is very different as well. Rhizobium is a nitrogen fixing bacteria. Time point 3 is when the plants are about to be mature. There is a lot of nitrogen fixation happening perhaps at 2 tons per acre. So we are obviously deconvoluting this data as we speak, but the question that is emerging is, can we influence the relative abundance of yield and quality enhancing microbes by tailoring the biochar, customizing the biochar to the soil types? So with that, I would like to just thank the folks at Carbon Logic. I presented their data. David Drinkard is the president and CEO. He's been leading the transition of ag at this company from R&D, and Scott Mossard, who does a lot of the sales lead in R&D. In my lab, I'd like to acknowledge Elvir and Dalen, who basically conducted this work as part of their master's thesis. I also would like to acknowledge funding received from W. Sayre, Stump Farmer Farms, and Coles Company. Thank you very much for your attention. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. We appreciate that. Okay, so Quatermoc, why don't you speak? And there will be time for questions of the speakers after. So do you want to share your screen? Unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah, due to legal nicety, we're not able to share pictures of the farm, but this is, since I'm a farmer anyway, it's going to be just farmer talk, and I'll be able to tell you exactly what we've done. So I'll share with you a little bit about the information I've gathered is from the cannabis industry here in Oregon, and in particular, the live resin production capture. This is not for flower production, this is for live resin. So the companies that I'm talking and work with, it's going to be Bobsled Farms, Springwater Ranch, and Good Dog Farms. They hired me as a consultant to make these companies succeed, and I use biochar as the hub for that. All of these farms were organic growers, and they had existing data on all of their production prior to coming on. They were 2 to 3 years into production. These farms all utilize indoor grow, greenhouse growing, light deprivation cultivation, which is where they black out the sun, and then full-term cannabis. So we had a real good range of many years prior, many existing operations or done organically, where I can see how these plants were grown prior to regenerative farming practices using biochar. The planting mediums that we used were both soil in 35-gallon pots, 50-gallon pots. We did row farming, 8 foot wide, 400 feet long, and we were able to inoculate 10% char into the pots, and out into the rows, we went 15% char. But what's really good about the rows is some of the rows got the 15% char tilled into them completely, while the other half of the field only got the 15% biochar planted in at planting, which means we removed about 7 to 10 gallons of soil, mixed in the proper biochar for that, filled the holes, and then planted. All the biochar we used was from Rogue Biochar or from Wind River Organics, and it's 80% plus carbon on their biochar. Gave us a great a chance for success. What we did different, which most people don't, is it took a long time to convince the farms to spend the money on the char. So when they finally did, there wasn't a lot of time for planting. So we used the char raw, and we used the char, but we inoculated with both EM, effective microorganism technology, and bokashi. These are very rich, microbial rich consortia that utilize fermentation. So we did that 1 week before planting. So there was a lot of what ifs that were happening because I've never used chars raw and so fresh. So I had to make sure that the microbials were put on there. Some of the results that we saw from the grow is that it required less than a gallon per day of water for full-grown plants. And these plants had such rapid growth that the OLCC, who regulates the cannabis industry, came out and said they were some of the best plants that they saw. And they actually had the farms raise their cameras up even higher than the regulations of standard because the plants were so vigorous in growth. So at our particular farm, our cameras are doubled up set because of the rapid growth. We saw great pest resistance. I mean, we had our share of hemp aphids and the things that got to us, but the plants that were resistant seemed to have a tougher skin that the bugs couldn't bite into. And the frost damage that came through, the freeze seemed to stack on top of each other, kind of like snowflakes instead of on the biomass itself, which was very interesting to see. Our stalks were extremely thick. It gave us great wind protection. And the soil was just thriving with fungi and bacteria. You can see tons and tons of mushroom out in the field, where prior years, the owners said they were unable to see these type of signs of the ecology. The plants finished a little bit earlier with nice color and smell. Now, when everyone's doing their bricks testing in cannabis, we do something called terpene testing, and that's directly related to the smell. The terpene tests that were coming in on some of the cultivars, our Jack Herer was like 21.6%, almost doubled what it was 3 years. They've been growing this thing for 3 years, and we doubled that one. And the Charlotte's Web was about 17.5. Those terpene tests are still extremely hard to reach without biochar. We went from about a 4% capture in oil to 7% capture. So they was able to produce a lot of trichome heads, which resulted in more product for sale with higher terpene profiles. So a really high-end product for us. The cannabinoid results on the dry flower that we tested were twice as high as what they did the years before. So they were extremely happy about the results, not only in the oil resin production, but testing the dry flower itself just to see what it looked like prior to going into extraction. And then transplanting everything out in the field with the biochar soils. Sometimes in propagation rooms, the plants hold a little longer than they should, they suffer, but all the transplants seem to really take off, and we're excited to be in the new soil that we were able to reach the maximum growth once we got those plants into the biochar filled soils. Some of the things I saw, and this is farmer knowledge, like I said, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a straight farmer, but what we do notice out in the field, especially after doing this for 20 years, growing these plants, you do notice that there has to be some direct relationship with the electrical conductivity coming from the soil and the fast cellular divisions happening within the plant. And even the electron chain transfer, part of that cellular division, seems to be more complete and move us into this realm of what we're looking at as the fourth phase of water, which is highly critical when we're looking at plant growth, must be contributed somehow by this high electrical conductivity soil. So the electrical support from the biochar is directly related to the terpenes, which are counting on a carbon ring to hold them together and hold them tight. That we find that this electrostatic being able to maintain itself for so long is why we're not gassing off a lot of our volatile terpenes, and they're maintaining with the product. So these are the kind of things where, it's not scientifically proven yet, but we can see where all of this electrical influence and potential is direct related to, in our field, what we call terpene development, and how that increases the flavor and the value of our crops. And that's all I got.
That's fantastic. Great. You want to, in case anybody's interested in more information about this, do you want to give your email address?
Yeah, if you'd like to know more about cannabis production, veggie production, you can reach me at Bokashi, Bokashi, number 4, letter U, at gmail.com. And yeah, I'd like to talk to you there.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's just open it up for questions now. If anybody has questions for any of the speakers, we have Brett Kankaren is here, Charles Hegberg, Amit is still here. Let's see, I think we have Debbie Dumrose, Doug Beck, Johannes Lehman is here. Thank you for staying, Johannes. Kathleen Draper is here, Kelpie Wilson, and you can see everybody who's here. So if anybody has any questions from any of the discussions, either this morning or this afternoon, go right ahead. Please use the chat function and then and put it to everyone so everyone can see the questions.
I have a question for Doug, actually.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
Doug, I was curious if you saw that the berries ripen faster or sooner when you treat it with biochar or biochar plus compost.
No, in fact, everything ripened together, which was kind of a good sign.
Yeah. Well, we've kind of noticed that especially in the lettuce trial that I just shared, it seems the plants are able to really increase the biomass faster, and so that's been a constant observation in the greenhouse as well. Plants reach their vegetative maxima, and I think grape vines are a perennial crop, so maybe it's a different. That's why I was curious compared to these annual crops where they reach their achieve their vegetative maximum sooner, and that's why perhaps we are seeing a little bit of a change, a shift in where the carbon from the photosynthesis process is going. So just curious about that.
Yeah, I kind of expected it to be off a little bit, but it really was very tight in terms of all the treatments maturing at the same time. And I think it has a lot to do with degree days, temperature, sunlight in terms of maturing the fruit. I was mainly hoping not to see any negative impacts from biochar on ripening. I was happy to see that there weren't.
Yeah, we are starting some trials with perennial crops ourselves to start seeing that now. Want to observe what kind of benefits we get over a few years, because these are some of the unanswered questions in this field. So, and your biochar was from what source? Sorry if I missed that earlier.
It was from Pacific Biochar, and I think it was not the low ash. It was the regular style of biochar that they produce from forest waste.
Okay, from the forest waste. Okay, the wood-based biochar, which is more, it's higher, it's lower in nitrogen, but definitely higher in carbon. So, all right.
I'm seeing something just listening to a few presentations that the reproductive actions seem to be impacted across the board.
Yeah.
It's actually some anecdotal evidence from someone in Ecuador who grows roses who got 30% more blooms of 50% larger size, which is amazing to get from a very small amount of biochar applied.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot. The reproductive aspects are very important with this.
Yeah.
Amit, there's a couple more questions for you. Actually, one's from Kristen. It says Carbon Logic is a blended product, correct?
I can answer that. And actually, it is not a blended product. It is basically coming out of the direct use. They're using crop residue, primarily wheat, and it's basically being processed through their biomass processing unit. And that's what they get at the end. It's not a blended product. And the NPK value, there are some reports we can share from the studies that we can provide that to you. I can ask David to get a hold of those, but it is higher on nitrogen content. So did the trials include controls that considered the increased plant nutrition? Of course, we always try to use controls in that case. But the point is that even if you put nitrogen separately into the soil, the mechanism of how biochar will hold on to some of the nutrients, it's like a slow release drug, if you will. I think that changes the dynamics of uptake. So we basically went with no biochar and biochar and just fertilized it normally. I know, is that good, Kristen? Does that answer your question, or would you like some more information?
There's another one from Andrew. You see that?
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say, Kristen, did you have?
Yeah, sure, Amit. I don't know. I guess that answers my question. I guess we've done a lot of analysis of wheat straw-based biochars, and we haven't seen a lot of nitrogen in those chars because they generally burn off during the production process. And I'm familiar with Ag Energy's production, so I guess I'm really surprised that you retain nitrogen in a wheat straw-based product. So I'll talk to David about it, but I'd love to see the NPK values of those.
Sure. And you know, when we apply these fertilizer, and part of the reason we are going into this microbiome study is perhaps now these plants are also probably performing better because of the presence of this biochar. We are able to see some enhanced microbial communities. I didn't share all the results of that, but that could also be contributing to the faster breakdown of organic forms of nitrogen. That could be another aspect of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll go to the next question, which says, did you use charged biochar in your experiments? If it was raw, how would you expect charged char to act differently? As I mentioned earlier, basically this is char coming out directly from the biomass processing unit, which is a very controlled process, reproducible process. So there was no additional step of charging it as such. If the cation exchange capacity of the char that is produced is pretty good, actually, based on the normal range that you would expect, and we just use it directly. Don't know what will happen if we could try that out as well, if we went through a secondary step of charging it as well.
Okay, looks like there's a new question sort of open to the floor from Hugh regarding quality control tests. Does anybody want to chime in on that? Who's using what labs?
Doug, you want to take this one, or I could?
Yeah, you can go ahead and unmute if you want to chime in. Well, Hugh, do you want to chime in on what on your system?
Sure. Well, I don't have to talk about my system. I can talk about the industry as a rule, which is, you get you send off your best looking biochar and you get your best looking spec sheet back from soil control labs, and they seem to be immortal. And my question is specifically in-house. Do you see variability in your char supplier? And if so, how do you test for it? Or are you sort of flying on faith and blindness, which is good until something goes wrong?
Decent question.
Maybe I can address that, because I think, Hugh, this is a problem that I also noticed in the publications out there. And I think that's where, and this might come across as an advertisement, but I will just say that I think that's what gave me a lot of confidence in working with Ag Energy, because they have pre-programmed processes for their biochar. So the quality of the biochar coming out from each batch to batch is consistent. And I think that is reflected in the type of results we are observing time and again.
So here's another question from to everybody about characterization of the char. I assume everybody does that, but that does kind of relate to Hugh's question.
Exactly.
There is a lot of variability, obviously, and I think we need to do a lot better as an industry in standardizing that. And I think there's work being done on that, but it is still kind of the Wild West a bit.
I'll just jump in and say that at USBI we are trying to do a survey of the labs that are out there that will do biochar characterization, because that's a really big bottleneck. We just don't have many labs that will do it, and none of them will do all the tests. So we have Isabel Lima is working on that. She's one of our board members. So look for that to come out from USBI here fairly soon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just wanted to say, I just showed you some microscopy photographs, but we also did EDX. It's a X-ray sort of microscopy plus X-ray based approach to quantify, sometimes qualitative. You can do quantitative work from that as well. So I think part of the missing link is to be able to really create a standard process for that. And as a advisor to Ag Energy or Carbon Logic, that's what I'm advising as well, to create a system where we do in-house testing with some of these additional aspects, which definitely provides more confidence to the customer or the user or the researcher as well, because I don't want to get two different batches of product that are not of the same quality or inconsistent quality.
So Marshall, could you clarify that question a little bit? What do you mean exactly by measuring? Is that just over an 18-month period of regular production, or?
Well, I guess the question should be better phrased. I apologize. The question I'm looking for are any of these studies, because I came in the middle of this because I was in another meeting, but I'm a member of what is known in Europe as the Cost Action Group on biochar. And a lot of the studies we did over 6 years were 18 months or longer, and other longitudinal studies. Is anybody doing longitudinal studies with these projects? I mean, I know that, for instance, the results that we've seen in Europe when people do this stuff is if they do it, let's say in a university setting in the United States, it's typically, you know, a semester or a year. And based on longitudinal studies, especially if you're using unformulated char or not blended, as I think somebody mentioned, what happens, not to everything, but there's a lot of results in which there's leaching in the ground. It looks great in the beginning, especially if you have a high carbon content and a low ash content. But then after a certain period of time, for certain crops and certain horticultural products, it begins to leach out, and it has a detrimental effect on the soil.
Well, Doug, we're on our 3rd year, aren't we? With the Oasis trial.
It's actually 4 years now in the ground. So,
well, that's good. So my question would be, when I was watching you guys present that, Doug, I missed your presentation. So are you using a blended char or a formulated char, or are you just using char right out of the machine?
this was straight biochar from Pacific Biochar, out of made from forest waste in the Sierra foothills.
Right. Okay.
And we did not characterize. I rely on the company providing the biochar to provide me with a good product, and so that's what I went with.
Okay.
And we did do 4 different replicants with control and biochar alone and biochar and
Yeah, it was a large replicated trial with half-acre blocks or sub-blocks, so an 8-acre trial, and with lots of measurements taken. So,
Were there differences in your presentation in the tests that you've done for 4 years? Is it the same type of soil? Is it an alkaline soil, non-alkaline? What?
it's a neutral soil. It's largely sand. So it's a very, very low organic matter situation in which anything organic matter added is going to be a benefit. So
right, absolutely. I mean, that's terrible.
Compost and compared against compost plus biochar. And really it was the compost plus biochar that really gave the best results, giving short-term nutrient advantage as well as long-term carbon. Cool. So yeah, we'll watch it over years. We're not going to let this one go away. We're definitely going to watch the yields over time to see what happens.
Yeah. And
will you be sharing those results over time?
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I'll hook up with you then.
You bet.
Yeah, and we'll have them on our website, the Sonoma Biochar Initiative and the Sonoma Ecology Center, and we will be publishing. You have a presentation to the Sustainable Wine Growers Conference. Is that right? Is that going to be very similar to what
Ag Sustainability Expo that's held in early November? Yeah, we'll be presenting the same data with a little bit extended.
Cool.
So yeah, this data will be available publicly.
Absolutely.
Great. I think one of the things you mentioned, Raymond, is that it's a Wild West in biochar, and definitely is. And we've been involved in it since 2012 in Europe, and I keep seeing different things going on all over the world. We've been doing work in the Middle East, we've been doing work in Africa, and we've been doing work in South America. I haven't done too much work in the United States, but so that's why I was interested in attending this. You know, and we are members of IBI and big supporters of Kathleen and her efforts.